Chapter 11, Seeds of a Gang. When I returned to the South Central colony, there were salutations all around from my homeboys. It was a customary gesture to pay homage to any one of us who had done time without snitching. Bub was the first to shake my hand and comment on how buff I had become, but mostly he was showing gratitude for my knowing how to keep my mouth shut. The streets hadn't changed much during the months I'd been gone. The gang problem was still festering and racial ferment was everywhere. A riot occurred in Wilmington, North Carolina, where the National Guard had to be called in. The Black Panthers Field Marshal George Jackson was shot and killed as a result of an alleged escape attempt at San Quentin State Prison. The political activist Angela Davis was still in the Marin County Jail, and a rebellion was in full swing at Attica Correctional Facility in Upper New York State. Not to mention the usual problems: poor education, no employment opportunities for youth, lack of youth programs, broken family units. All these negative realities fed the growing civil rights movement. While black economic programs experienced a full downswing, the gang factor and its circle of violence were experiencing a surge. This was a growth industry. Throughout South Central, there were many factions of visible Latin street gangs with parasitical appetites. Contrary to popular beliefs, black gangs were not a phenomenon, but rather a commonality that existed long before I was born. The older gangs, the notorious Slossons, Gladiators, and the businessmen had become ethnicity conscious and were absorbed into the Black Panther Party or other active political groups. A few remaining older black gangs were still hanging on: the Chain Gang, Lowriders, Avenues, Brims, Figueroa Boys, and the Van Ness Boys. These gangs gave rise to newer, more predatory gangs such as the Sportsman Park Boys, Denker Boys, Manchester Park Boys, Hustler Mob, Newhouse Boys, and many other street cliques. But in spite of our lack of numerical strength, I had several trump cards over the other gangs. As I had moved from school to school, juvenile facility to another juvie, and hood to hood, I had established ties in each area with certain key youths who held influence over their circle of homeboys. Their homeboys became mine, and mine became theirs. I was catapulted to the helm of our circle, not by force of referendum, but by virtue of opportunity, conditions, and self-promotion. Simply, I stepped into a vacuum, an uncontested position tailor-made for me. There was no turning back, not really, because the more we fought, the more deeply entrenched we became in vendettas. Though the black images we saw across the barricades were seen as the enemy, we had no notion that our true adversaries were the squalid living conditions, the vortex of powers confining us to those conditions, and our own unwitting perpetration of those conditions. Like countless other black gang members and criminals, we were unconscious accomplices in our own subjugation, our own worst foes. Gang battles raged, and we picked up the pace by drive-by beatings. Often, we'd bail out of a stolen car to beat down unsuspecting rivals while I let them know it was me, Tookie, who was doing this to them. If they didn't remember anything else, they'd remember my name. As long as the local gangs were at each other's throats and didn't unite to smash us like ants, we could stand up against any of them, despite the fact that we were outnumbered. Though they despised us, the name they cursed most was mine. I had become the neighboring gang's number one target, which I encouraged with my need to be feared and known by all of them. It was becoming a familiar sight for gangs to cruise the area leaving messages such as, "Tell Tookie we're looking for him," or "Tell Tookie we're gonna kill him." One evening at a dance held at the St. Andrews Park Gymnasium, the Chain Gang caught a few of us off guard. The guy who approached me was Davian, a 20-something-year-old loudmouth who wouldn't bust a grape with cleats on. But surrounded by a mob of other grown men posing as his backup, Davian was bold enough to thrust a finger in my chest and ask, "Are you Tookie?" It was deja vu for me, reminding me of the time when Lewis and his cronies stomped me in the dirt behind Manual Arts. This time I flipped the script and lunged at Davian, causing both of us to fall to the ground. The darkness in the gym enabled me to crawl out of the scuffle while Davian's homeboys continued to punch and kick him, thinking that it was me they were really beating. Meanwhile, Bub, in the gymnasium's kitchen, held other chain gang members at bay with a starter pistol until they realized it was fake. But like me, he managed to escape a serious beatdown. Back then, there were constant reminders of our mortality, especially when shots were being fired at us. Earning a reputation through fisticuffs was being replaced by gunslinging, by youths who lacked any ability to fight and needed an equalizer. It took nerve to fight with your hands. It's much easier to pick up a handgun and brandish it like a would-be tough guy. Even a child could do this, and with deadly effect. It is true that we had access to a cache of guns, but such weapons represented an imposing symbol of death that exceeded the limits. It is true that we had access to a cache of guns, but such weapons represented an imposing symbol of death that exceeded the limits of our intent to beat the rival gangs into submission. The horrors of gunplay disturbed me so much that for a long time I had to distance myself from possessing one. Guns represented death, and I feared the potential. Nevertheless, even while hot lead was flying in our direction, I still didn't give death a second thought. I had a false sense of invincibility. I wanted to live life, but I was presented with a meaningless future with no dreams, no tangible hopes. I lived each day with reckless abandon, not fearing tomorrow. God looks out for babies and fools, as the expression goes. The fool in me was beginning to run amok. Perhaps that's why death passed me by. Also, most of my rivals and enemies didn't even know what I looked like. I was said to be tall, with a scarred face and jet black skin, a muscle-bound nut. I was pegged as a villain who harassed other gangs, didn't play fair, and needed to be taught a lesson. My street reputation continued to grow, surpassing the leaders of all other gangs, and although I wanted the notoriety, I didn't anticipate the headaches and other consequences. The police and school administration were receiving complaints about a student named Tookie who was causing trouble on and off the grounds. Both authorities wanted to identify this person. Even some parents of local gang members were up in arms about this mysterious troublemaker, but none of them could finger me. In school, gang members and everybody else knew me only as Stan, and I wanted to keep it that way as long as possible. Our crew's fashion style was dissimilar to that of other street gangs, but more and more we began to emulate them. My homeboys began to adopt gang names. Erskine became Mad Dog, Terry was now Bimbo, Big Bob chose the Hawk, and Donald called himself Sweetback, after the main character in a Melvin Van Peebles movie, Sweetback's badass song. Other homeboys did likewise. Soon, Terry and I got our left ears pierced, with the intent of enhancing our thug image. Other homeboys followed suit, styling the same kind of gold hook and cross, or a small gold hoop earring. We had gravitated toward the gang realm as if we belonged there. The consistent attacks we initiated, assisted by the street gangs destroying one another, were beginning to turn the tide in our favor. Several of the larger gangs showed an interest in switching sides, extending an olive branch of compromise, while others reluctantly continued to fight. It was time to consolidate the friends and acquaintances I had cultivated for the past few years to avoid making the divide and conquer mistakes made by other street. It didn't take a mathematician to see that when a structure is divided into factions, each individual part loses its potency and thus is exposed to possible annihilation. I didn't want to make that mistake.